Hey, it's Dan, and in this video we're going to upgrade the front master cylinder on this KTM RC390. I decided to go with the Brembo RCS15, which I used on other bikes. The reason why I like this one better than the stock master cylinder is because it gives me a lot more feel of the front brake. I plan to mostly track this bike, so this is a great upgrade. Alright, so brake fluid is pretty corrosive, so before doing anything, it's a good idea to protect the bike with some rags or towels. Now, the original banjo bolt is probably pretty tight, so it's going to be easiest to loosen it before removing the old master cylinder. And with the banjo bolt loosened, we can now remove the two bolts holding on the master cylinder. And next up, we'll unscrew the banjo bolt. You want to make sure to have some rags or paper towels to protect the bike from corrosive brake fluid, since most likely some of that brake fluid is going to drip out at this point. So, the new master cylinder banjo bolt connection is on the bottom and not on the side like the old one, so I found it easiest to reroute the brake line under the switchgear cables. I also clipped off a few zip ties holding the brake line to the frame of the bike to give it enough slack so that it can move around easily as the bars are turned. The Brembo master cylinder threads are different, so you need to use a new banjo bolt with the right threads. You want to make sure to install a new crush washer on the top and the bottom of the banjo bolt. Also, make sure that you insert the banjo bolt from the bottom up so that it can easily screw into the new master cylinder later. Now, one tricky thing about this installation is that the switchgear has a part that sticks out and prevents the new master cylinder from being installed flush against the switchgear. This forces the master cylinder to be farther away from the switchgear and makes the brake lever more likely to interfere with the plastic when you squeeze it. But the good news is that it's actually pretty easy to cut off the excess plastic and install the new master cylinder right up against the switchgear. To make the adjustment, we'll first remove the two screws holding the switchgear together. Next, we'll remove the two screws holding the throttle position sensor to the switchgear. The bottom part just slides out, so we'll remove it and then use a Dremel tool to cut off the excess plastic. The top part isn't as easy to remove, so we'll just use the Dremel tool to cut it off while it's still on the bike. What you're looking for is a smooth and even surface so that the master cylinder can be installed right up against the switchgear. And now that we trimmed both parts, we'll reassemble the switchgear. It fits back together pretty easily, so just take your time and don't force anything. Remember, if it's not fitting back together easily, you're not doing it right. Pause, take a break, and try again. Don't force it or it's going to break. Okay, so I'm a big fan of testing as you go, and it's a good idea to make sure that the switches and the throttle still work the way that they need to. And next up, we'll loosely install the master cylinder onto the handlebars. Next, we'll assemble the reservoir by attaching the mounting bracket and the hose. And just a tip, I found it easier to slide the clamps on after lubricating the hose. Next, we'll attach the reservoir to the master cylinder and then install the mounting bracket to the top screw that holds the master cylinder on the bike. Be sure to use the longer screw that came with the reservoir kit and not the shorter one that came with the master cylinder. Next up, we'll move around the handlebars and position the master cylinder so that it doesn't interfere with the handlebar movement. Remember that you may also need to bend the bracket that holds it in place to make sure that you clear the windshield and the instrument cluster. And next we'll tighten the banjo bolt. Be sure that the brake line has enough slack and it's not stressed as you move the handlebars back and forth. I ended up cutting off a couple of zip ties that held the brake line to the frame, and it now works perfectly. Now, if you want to retain the brake light functionality, you're going to need to install the micro switch that comes with the master cylinder. It's probably easier to install it before installing the master cylinder onto the bike, but you can also do it while it's on the bike. To do this, I removed the brake lever to make it easier to see and to install. The micro switch has two posts that snap into the holes on the bottom of the master cylinder. It's super easy to do. Just align them, push them in, and it'll be good to go. And next we'll make the electrical connection to the original wires that we removed from the old master cylinder. It's easiest just to cut off the old connectors, cut the new micro switch cables to length, and then solder them together. The polarity of the cables doesn't matter in this case, so there's no need to pay attention to the cable colors. Now, I'm a huge fan of soldering all my electrical connections. If you don't have a soldering iron or a soldering gun, you can also twist the cables and tape them up, but you'll be risking them coming loose over time. So I'd really strongly recommend getting a soldering iron and doing it right. Once the solder is cooled, we also want to make sure to wrap up the connections with electrical tape. So first, wrap them individually to prevent shorts, and then wrap them together to keep things clean. And finally, the last few steps will be to add brake fluid and bleed the brakes. You always want to use fresh brake fluid and always take extra care to protect the bike from spills, because the brake fluid is corrosive and will damage your paint. So, bleeding the brakes is super easy even if you've never done it before. The idea is to keep adding more and more new brake fluid into the reservoir as you push the old fluid through the braking system by repeatedly squeezing the brake lever and then opening the bleeding valve. We'll do this with the master cylinder first, so the top connection, and then do the same thing again at the brake caliper. I like using a catch can with a clear hose to collect the old fluid because it makes things simple and it's easy to check for air bubbles. Okay, so we'll open the bleeding valve, squeeze the brake lever which will push old fluid out of the system, keep the lever squeezed as we close the bleeding valve, and then release the brake lever which will pull fresh fluid in from the reservoir. The order is important and you never want to release the brake lever while the bleeding valve is open. You also never want to let the reservoir run dry or you're going to suck air into the system and we'll have to start all over again. So again, the steps are: open the valve, squeeze the lever and hold it squeezed, close the valve, release the lever, and repeat. And we'll keep doing this until the brake lever feels firm and there's no more air bubbles coming out of the bleeding valve. When everything looks and feels good, we'll fill up the reservoir to the max fluid level and close it up. It's a good idea to thoroughly clean up the area to make sure you don't leave behind any brake fluid. It's super corrosive and will damage your paint if you just leave it on the bike. So I like to spray the area with some soap and water and then wipe it down with some clean paper towels. And finally, we'll use the adjustment screw to set the distance of the brake lever from the handlebars. This is a total preference thing, so set it the way that you like.